My full name is Sriram Ganapathy Iyer. I go by Sri Ganapathy. I was born in 1971 in a city in Kerala, which is a state in India. The name of the city is Thiruvananthapuram, which got anglicized by the British, and it's currently called Trivandrum.
Do you speak different languages?
Good question. I actually can speak close to 4 or 5 languages.
Wow.
Most Indians do who grew up in India. So my mother tongue, which we speak at home, is called Tamil because we are Tamils from the state of Tamil Nadu. But we also speak Hindi, which is the national language of India. Speak English, of course. Speak a little bit of Malayalam, which is where my parents are from. It's a different state neighboring to Tamil Nadu. And I can read and write Sanskrit, which is an ancient Indian language.
Could you talk a little bit more about what initially brought you here?
So one of the things which brought me and a lot of folks like me in the early 90s were the opportunities in America. So before globalization, I think the whole Indian economy globalized in the early 2000s. So in the 90s, America was like the promised land, right? So there were a lot of opportunities, especially for higher studies. Most Indians are they highly value education. So I did my bachelor's in electrical engineering in India, and I was looking for doing a master's degree. So I had a choice of either doing it in India or doing it in North America, like US or Canada. So I chose the US and chose Detroit to come pursue my master's degree and go from there. And ended up getting a job here, and next thing you know, 20 years later, I'm in Detroit. I'm a native Detroiter now.
Mm-hmm.
When I landed in Detroit, this was the pre-internet age.
Okay.
So at that time, it was really hard, especially for a person like me, unless you knew someone locally. Like if I go back to the early 90s, I came here in fall of 93. So at that time, for me, to even arrange a pickup from the airport, you physically had to know a person, and I had to get his fax number, and I mean, there was no email at that time, right? So it was pretty difficult, just giving you an example. Once I landed here, what people would do, and even what I did, was go through the phone book of yellow pages or white pages in Detroit, look for names which kind of sounded, Indian or South Asian, and people just random calls saying, hey, I'm this student. I came here. It looks like you're nearby. Can I come over for some good food or something like that? Hang out. And this wasn't considered crazy at that time.
Really? Wow. Okay.
So today, if I think of just calling someone over the phone, they're like, I would hear a click on the other side.
Yeah, that's
right?
initially what I was thinking. Is like, I can't imagine trying to call an agent. Like, can I just come over for a deal?
Right. One of the things which binds any culture and community is the food, right? Obviously. So you're looking to get some good food, which you kind of grew up with back home, like Indian food. So Detroit at least had, at that time, if I can remember, the whole city of Detroit had like at least 1 or 2 Indian stores where you could get groceries. But I heard stories of people who landed here in the 70s. At that time, you could only doctors and physicians would come to the US, right? So in the early 70s, they were probably the closest Indian store to Detroit was in New York.
What was your favorite thing about Detroit when you first moved here?
So before coming to Detroit, so I knew that I was landing here, right? So I had a different vision of Detroit. So when I knew that I was coming to Detroit, I went to the video library and I picked a couple of movies. And the movies about Detroit was RoboCop.
Oh God!
So I was like, so my parents were like, "Oh, are you going there?" But anyway, when I landed, my the impression of Detroit was really good. I landed on campus. The campus of Wayne State in downtown is really good, and when you're surrounded by friends and good people, it's always good. And the campus, we had an international, I forget the name, International Academy, I think. So they welcome the international students.
Okay.
So we had a counselor who we could go and talk to.
Mm-hmm.
So the university did a really good job. The organization I represent is called the Great Lakes Aradhana Committee. So it's been around for this is the 31st year in existence. So I personally got involved with it for, it's just been 5 years, so
Okay.
believe it or not. So stepping back a little bit about the history of the organization itself. So most Indians and Southeast Asians who landed in Michigan landed in Flint earlier.
Okay.
Flint was the biggest employer at that time. They had like 3 or 4 GM factories and a lot of action going on there. So this organization was actually centered around the Flint area, Genesee County at that time. And if you look at the history of Indian temples which were built in the U.S., New York was the first, Pittsburgh was the second, Flint, there is a temple, it's the third temple in the U.S. So this organization was also supporting the temple and its activities. There were a lot of activities which started at the temple. Over the years, with more and more Indians landing in Detroit, it was in the Detroit area and not in Flint. And people, even the folks who lived in Flint, kind of moved over to Detroit because there were more opportunities there. So we are currently based in Southeast Michigan. So pretty much what we've been doing so far is bringing concerts, promoting native North American talent. So that's one of the big things we do.
Okay.
It's not just bringing artists from India who are visiting and having concerts here. We have this event called Indo-American Festival of Performing Arts. So we call it, so that's the English name for it. We call it Sarovar, which is a Sanskrit name for it. And one of the interesting things is Sarovar actually means lakes in Sanskrit. So that kind of follows with where we are in Michigan, surrounded by lakes, and bringing that festival to the Southeast Michigan audience. One of the big things we've been doing is building bridges that span racial, cultural, and ethnic divisions through the arts, with the goal of embracing all cultural art forms in mind. At the end of the day, you're not looking at one culture and one art form, right? Some of these art forms are so collaborative that an art is an art anywhere you go in the world. So if there's a painter who does a painting, there are other painters in other countries who appreciate it, right? Some of the instruments are kind of similar and common between cultures. So a percussion instrument, for example, right? You go anywhere in the world, starting from the Middle East to Africa to Native Americans to South Asians. Pretty much the fingering technique and the basic rhythm technique is the same. But at the end of the day, music can be appreciated with music lovers.